Welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. It is February 19th, 2007, and you're going to get a pre-record that was done just yesterday with Dave McGowan. We're going to be talking about his book, Program to Kill, and the history of serial killers, or at least the most recent few decades of such, where it might have been not necessarily a sporadic or organic thing, if you will. I guess I got hacked during the weekend, and I don't know. It was more like somebody was in there being a poltergeist and moving furniture around, if you know what I mean. Shows disappeared. In fact, one is still gone. It is the Chapman show, but it's on the server. See, I mean, whatever they did just to the website. The audio's on the server, and if you want to hit the Chapman show, and you can see from all the other links on the audio page, they go by obviously a certain pattern. You can pretty much guess sometimes, if you don't see what's there, that in fact you can hit it. So with this one, of course, it would be visigot.com/audio/Chapman2-9-07. .mp3, right? Chapman's name, Chapman2-9-07.mp3, and you'll be able to get Chappie. All right, so anyway, I don't know what that was about. It could have been a lot worse. We'll see if it happens a second time. I don't know if this is a warning or something like that, because of what we've been doing. Or it could be just a coincidence, honestly. It could be that. So we'll see what transpires, and that, I think, will tell all. In the meantime, I still can't breathe, so bear with me. We got Dave McGowan for it, and we'll have him back again tomorrow. We are taping this on Sunday, February 18th for play today, Monday, the 19th. We have with us Dave McGowan. The website, by the way, if you want to check it out while you're listening, is www.davesweb.cnchost.com. You can hit that also from my website, either the upcoming shows or his audio, which will be archived right after you hear this. He's the author of 3 books, Program to Kill, get it out there, bro, Learning the F Word, and Derailing Democracy, and it's about Program to Kill that we're going to speak to today. And so, Dave, thanks very much for joining us out there on the left coast, huh?
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Well, it's been a long time, and, serious as a heart attack. Folks have said to me time and time again, why don't you? Why don't you? How come you haven't had you on? And you know what? They're right. And so anyway, that time is past us, and you're here, and I'm glad that you are. Again, you've agreed to be on tomorrow also to talk about another subject. But with Program to Kill, and it deals with the nature of, I guess, serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, down in Florida, as you well know, they've had their share. One was just put to death recently. But from your take, are you seeing this as something also that, I hate to say it, I mean, it may not be the best term for it, but is this also kind of weaponry that is somewhat unleashed against the population?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
I see it very much as being that, yeah. I see it as being basically, I guess you could say, a psychological warfare tactic, very much along the lines that terrorism is used, in that it's a vehicle of sorts for instilling fear in people, and as it's become more and more apparent, particularly over the last several years, it's all about control through fear. I mean, that's the basic operating principle of our government and most other governments as well. You strike enough fear into people, and they're going to run to Big Brother for protection. We see that with terrorism now. Alleged terrorism anyway, and before that, and still, the serial killers play very much the same role. I mean, very few things strike fear into people's hearts the way that serial killers do. So yeah, I think it's very much sort of a created phenomenon that is used as a vehicle for social control.
Was there an event, was there a particular individual who obviously had a reign of terror that finally made you want to take a look into this? Because this is not a very pleasant subject, no doubt about it. I mean, it's as abysmal as a Nietzschean event. But was there something that happened out there that made you finally say, you know what, I want to take a look at this?
Yeah, there was actually. It kind of arose, and we talked a little bit about this, off the air. It kind of grew out of something that I discovered while researching my second book, which you mentioned in your intro, the Understanding the F-Word book, which was that George Bush, and very few people realize this, what they do realize is that he was like the governor. He basically green-lighted more executions during his tenure as governor of Texas than any governor in any state in the history of the Union. I mean, he is America's premier hanging governor, so to speak. And people do know that, but what they don't know is that he actually did issue one and only one pardon out of the, I think, 153 cases that crossed his desk as governor, and that was for a gentleman by the name of Henry Lee Lucas, a guy who at various times confessed to up to like 600 of the most brutal, horrendous serial killings imaginable, complete with cannibalism, necrophilia, torture, mutilation, all the standard that you find in these cases. And yet out of all the people who came before George Bush to have their cases reviewed, he was the only one granted a pardon. And that definitely piqued my interest. And I included that in the book, and I got a lot of feedback on that from people who said, well, why would he do that? Well, what, do you have a theory about why he would have done that? And at the time, I really didn't. So I decided to look into it, and what I discovered in researching his case was that he had once written a book, or assisted. He was largely illiterate, but he had basically told his story to another gentleman who had put it out as a book, a very obscure book entitled The Hand of Death. And what Henry claimed is that what looked like a series of random killings were actually basically contract killings, that he was killing on behalf of a cult, and that his victims were in fact targeted for specific purposes, and that his job basically was to make them look like random, senseless killings when in fact many of them had specific motives. And around that same time, I happened to, I think it was referred to me by someone or something that knew, that I was delving into this research, a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, which is an alternative study of the Son of Sam case, David Berkowitz, in which he presents a very similar scenario, which is that David Berkowitz was actually just one of many sons of Sam, and that he was acting on behalf of a cult of individuals, and that basically he became the fall guy to cover up the involvement of all these various other individuals. And that led me to a book, The Family, by Ed Sanders, about the Manson case, which had other parallels. And then I stumbled upon a couple cases in Europe that had been reopened, the Monster of Florence case, and another one that I can't think of right now, which had recently been reopened at the time that I was doing this research, because evidence had surfaced that those killings were not the work of a single individual, but were in fact the work of a cult of individuals. So, I started to realize that there was a few too many of these cases floating about for them to be just sort of isolated cases. So I avidly dove into the serial killer literature, so to speak, and started going through, the various books about first, all of your standard high-profile guys that everybody knows, the Ted Bundys, the John Wayne Gacy's, Jeffrey Dahmers, Hillside Stranglers, and those led me to various other cases, and ended up researching, some 36 or so, or maybe more, individual quote-unquote serial killer cases, and I found these same sort of common threads running through each of the stories. And what I began to realize is that there was a completely different way of looking at this whole serial killer phenomenon than the way that we are conditioned to look at these people. Was kind of a long answer.
I like that. That's just funny.
But that's basically how the book came about. A lot of people were kind of surprised by it because prior to that, my writings were, I don't want to say more mainstream, but they were not really as far off the beaten path as this book took me. Which, the threads running through that are ones of mind control and satanic cult and occult groups and all this kind of weird stuff that's normally thought of as being kind of the province of right-wing conspiracy theorists, where I have always thought of myself as being solidly on the left. And so it caught a lot of my readers by surprise that I had what they thought was, taking this kind of a change of direction. But, I mean, basically, I just follow the trail wherever it leads. I'm not really afraid to venture, in any direction. A lot of what I find I consider to be disinformation and nonsense. But, the more I looked into this, the more I realized that there was, some pretty solid documentation of a lot of this stuff. And the book, by the way, is drawn from almost exclusively from mainstream sources. This is not a book that's sourced to, posting on conspiracy.com or something like that. This is all information culled from very mainstream books, magazine articles, newspaper articles. It's my belief that you can get a pretty accurate picture of how the world operates from these sources, but it's all about knowing how to read between the lines and sort of mine out the little nuggets of information and connecting the dots. It's really all about pattern recognition and recognizing how these sort of hidden themes run through each of these individual stories.
What was your approach like in the book? Did you go ahead and profile certain individuals? Did you approach it that way, or is it a running narrative that starts chronological and ends up decades later? The organization of the book probably isn't the best. It's kind of rambles off in various directions. There's like so much information, so many different threads that I tried to follow. Probably could have used the services of an editor. Unfortunately, I didn't have one available. So I don't know that the book's really organized in any particular way. Right. It's just there's a lot of information packed in there, and I don't know. As far as how it's organized, it's kind of I don't know. It makes sense to me. I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense to some other people, but anyway. Oh, well, no. Obviously, I haven't availed myself of the book, but again, this is a topic, and it's kind of sounds nasty to use the word interesting, but it is interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. Actually, the first section of the book, like the first, 6 chapters, I think, which are organized into the first section, they're actually about organized pedophilia and child pornography and various things of that nature, and that sort of segues into the serial killer stuff because there are very, very clear parallels between the two topics. They maybe don't at first seem to be related, and some people are kind of surprised. They're like, wow, I'm 80 pages into this book and there's nothing about serial killers yet. Well, but it all kind of ties in if you just sort of stick with it through the end. It becomes pretty clear that it's all sort of tied in. The book goes into even the parallels between, for example, the John Benet Ramsey kidnapping and the so-called crime of the century kidnapping, alleged kidnapping. I don't believe he ever was kidnapped, but anyway, of the Lindbergh baby. And it covers a lot of ground, and to somebody who hasn't read it yet, it may seem like it's kind of a lot of unrelated stuff, but it actually is all very closely related as you see, as you know, as the book proceeds. It kind of all comes together.
Well, let me ask you, because do we have two things at play here? Do we have actual rogues or maniacs that operate on their own? And do we have a situation where we have, and I would say, a serial killer or a personification for serial killers? As you said, like with the Son of Sam, he's the one that hangs, but were there other operatives going on? So again, do we have some people who are definitely, just pathological, like Dahmer, I don't know, or Theo Bundy, who, wreaked havoc down here in Florida? Do we have some people running on their own, and do we have an orchestrated, shall we say, for lack of better words, maybe, network?
There is, I believe, a network to some extent, and there's a lot of connections between a lot of these cases that you wouldn't expect to find. In one of the chapters of the book, I actually kind of draw a distinction between what I believe are sort of, I guess you could say, programmed patsies and guys that are very, very likely programmed assassins. Albert DeSalvo being a classic example of the first. His case has recently been reopened, and modern DNA testing and stuff has basically proven that he was not, in fact, responsible for at least some of the murders that he was credited with, and in fact, he probably had nothing to do with any of them. He was never convicted, never even tried for any of the murders, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that, but he was actually never charged, tried, or convicted for any of those murders. And it's now becoming clear that he was in fact railroaded as a patsy, and some of the people behind that railroading had very clear CIA connections. There were indications of hypnosis and various things like that. It's quite an interesting story. And the classic example of the latter would be a guy like Arthur Shawcross, who was, or claimed to have been, a Phoenix program type assassin in Vietnam. He claimed to have racked up 43 kills in Vietnam, which were, just these barbaric crimes that he committed that, involved, rape and mutilation and leaving bodies on display and, all the stuff that serial killers traditionally do. And that's very typical of the Phoenix program. In fact, my book postulates that in many ways the serial killer phenomenon, which really bubbled to the surface in the latter years of the Vietnam War, was kind of a case of the Phoenix program coming home, because the Phoenix program was a torture, terror, and assassination in Vietnam. It was specifically designed to strike fear and demoralize the Vietnamese people. It was an assassination program that claimed at least 20,000 lives. I mean, our own Congress has admitted that at least 20,000 lives were taken by it, and other estimates range considerably higher than that. But these were crimes that were deliberately committed just as barbarically as possible to strike fear into the hearts of the Vietnamese people by leaving bodies on stakes and just doing all this just all these horrendous things that were done to as a psychological warfare tactic. And it's the very same things that you find with serial killers here at home, the very same behaviors, the very same sorts of scenarios. But anyway, Shawcross claimed 43 kills in that manner in Vietnam, none of which made him a murderer, of course. It just made him an American soldier. But then he continued on that pattern when he came home and racked up several more kills. So he is the guy that is mentioned in the book as just one example, a very clear-cut example of what I feel is a programmed assassin versus a programmed patsy. So I think there's both sort of factors at work there. these cases.
Well, it's. I'm glad you mentioned the situation about the salvo as the Boston Strangler. In a case like Manson, and maybe we can talk about that in a little bit, that looks like it was very much handled. But in a situation like the salvo, would there have been any kind of consortium or group that I wouldn't say benefited from it, but was there some kind of objective they were trying to achieve, or was this just some kind of also experiment to dry run a way of creating terror and see how it all works out? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I'm not really sure, to be honest. That one was I only know of that from what I've read in books and whatnot. It was a little before my time.
Stop it.
So I don't know, what the whole kind of social climate and whatnot was like back then. The Manson case was more, I was actually aware of it at the time, and it's kind of easy for me to look back now and say that was, in part, one of the objectives being pursued there was the discrediting of the whole hippie and hippie commune type movement. It was basically a way of saying, look at this, these aren't these peaceful hippie communes that we've been led to believe. These people are mass murderers, And I think at the same time, what was playing out was what was that group called? The Symbionese Liberation Army, with the whole, kidnapping of Patty Hearst and all that. And that group was quite obviously an intelligence front. I mean, all of the people, the main principal people involved in that were like former police informers and former FBI affiliates and all this. And the guy that really was behind starting it all was a guy named Colston Westbrook, I believe his name was, who worked out of Vacaville, which was the site of all sorts of mind control operations. You find all kinds of references to that in the mind control literature. And he was a former Phoenix program operative too, not coincidentally. And so there's numerous indications that was definitely an intelligence operation, and I think it was kind of a two-pronged strategy there with the Manson family sort of discrediting the hippie communes and the Symbionese Liberation Army sort of discrediting the more radical groups like the SDS and the Weather Underground and whatnot that were in operation at that time. And that was just one of the goals. I mean, there were others, but I believe that those were goals that were being pursued specifically there, but I don't know in the case of the Boston Strangler because it was just a little before my time.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me because it wasn't before my time. Thank you very much. But I take a look at three individuals, and one of them would be Gacy, the other would be Dahmer, and of course we talked about the salvo. Usually it's always females that seem to be the ones who are obviously victimized. With Dahmer and Gacy, that was not the case, though, wasn't it? And did you treat them at all in your book?
Yeah, they're both in there. And they both actually had fairly high-level government connections. Jeffrey Dahmer, there was a strange little story about him, about how he went to Washington, D.C. on a high school field trip when he was like 17, 18 years old. He's like a junior, senior in high school, something like that. Went with his class on a trip, and he ducked into a phone booth at one time and made a call, told his friends that he was going to arrange a private tour of the vice president's office for them. And, they were naturally skeptical, thought he was full of shit, but he made the call, and sure enough, he got him in not only just to a private visit to the vice president's office, but also to a private visit to the office of a very high-level columnist, Washington columnist at that time, whose name I can't remember. And, these are the kinds of things, these little tidbits of information that you will find in these people's stories that are never explored. They're just kind of tossed out there as sort of sides and never followed up on, and no one gives any significance to them. But, it's quite obvious that your normal average Midwestern kid going back to Washington, D.C. on a visit cannot make a quick phone call and secure a private tour of the vice president's office. That's just, that doesn't happen in the real world. This guy obviously had some kind of high-level family connections, And there were other indications as well. And Gacy would definitely had high-level connections. He was actually once photographed sitting side by side with Rosalind Carter at the time that she was First Lady. And he can be seen wearing a lapel pin that signifies that he has a very high-level Secret Service clearance. And, you know, parts of his police file were blacked out with the notation that it was FBI matter. And, I mean, there was all kinds of these little, you know, he claimed friendships with the governor of Illinois and the Attorney General. And, you know, I mean, this guy was connected politically, quite well connected politically. And that's a fact that's usually just completely brushed over in the biographies of him. And it's a very common, you know, Ted Bundy, same thing. You look at a lot of these people and you will find that there were, in fact, unexplained connections that these people had to people in high levels of, you know, power.
I'm going to ask you something which is kind of outside what we're doing, but based on that, it'll give me an idea of what other kind of questions I'd like to ask.
Okay.
Let's take a look about Clinton.
Okay.
Are you familiar with either the reality or the unreality of the Clinton body count?
I am aware. Yeah, I'm aware to some extent. I mean, I first heard about it years and years and years ago before I was as deeply enmeshed in the, you know, conspiracy, quote unquote conspiracy literature as I am now, and considering the source that it initially came from, which was like on a tape put out by, I don't know, Jerry Falwell or one of these guys, I thought it was, you know, complete nonsense when I first read it. But you know, no, I'm much less skeptical of those claims now. And I know there is quite a body count. Vince Foster being the most, you know, high profile of them, and I believe that he absolutely was whacked. There's no question in my mind that his suicide was not, in fact, a suicide. But I'm not completely up to speed on all the details of the list. And now,
no, the reason I bring it up is that in those Clinton Chronicles, the documentary that was released, I think it was also updated and released again. And you've got investigators for the Arkansas Bureau of Investigation. And they just kind of look like kind of nonplussed in the camera when they talk about all the stuff they had on him. And you also had some of the victims' relatives speaking, and they couldn't. I guess they've gotten to a point where they kind of understand why it never went to trial and nothing ever happened, but they are still to this day, I think, just bewildered that that could have been that prominent, that widespread, and yet he never hung and no one else ever did for that. But here's where I'm going with this also. Are we looking at with serial killers and those especially who might be victims, or not victims, but obviously I guess you would say proponents of MK Ultra and other mind control programs? Are we looking at something where there is a systemic and a very detailed way of eliminating individuals out there and making it look like somebody's just bull goose loony?
Yeah, that's certainly one. That's certainly one motivating factor. Yeah, the whole kind of mythos of serial killers arose at least in part to write off a lot of politically motivated killings as just sort of random acts of violence. That's certainly the BTK killer case. That was absolutely at play there. The first victims, his first alleged victims, were a military family, an intelligence guy who had, told his son that he was in fear for his life, and they felt he'd been targeted, and he'd given his son instructions on what to do should anything happen to him and all. I mean, this is a guy who knew that his life was on the line, and he was deeply involved with intelligence operations and whatnot, and sure enough, the whole family got wiped out. And then they sort of tacked on these other random killings of women that had absolutely nothing to do with the initial taking out of this family. I mean, the entire family pretty much, with the exception of one son, I think, was taken out. And, the surviving son has said that he just doesn't buy the single assailant scenario. It just absolutely would have been impossible. His father was a trained commando. He knew martial arts. He had weapons in the house. His wife was a judo instructor. The two kids knew judo. They had a guard dog on the premises that everyone agreed was vicious and fiercely loyal, would not have allowed anyone in that house that, he didn't think belonged there. And, the kid had said there's just no way that one guy walked into my house and took out my whole family. There's just no way that could have happened. My dad, was on the lookout to begin with. He was already looking over his shoulder. He was a tough guy. The rest of the family was trained. They were armed. There's no way. So, there's no question that family was basically taken out in some sort of paramilitary operation, and then they later just tacked on the deaths of all these women with completely different MO, had absolutely nothing to do with it, and said, oh, look, this is just a string of serial killings, that's all it is. So yeah, that's certainly one of the motivating factors behind the whole serial killer phenomenon, is that it allows politically motivated killings to be just sort of,
hidden,
swept under the rug, and nobody takes another look at them because, they're just random acts of violence.
Before we go any further, I want to tell you that with Dave McGowan, the website is www.davesweb.cnchost.com. As we said, he is the author of Program to Kill, Derailing Democracy, and I apologize for butchering the other one, which is Understanding the F Word, which I said was Learning the F Word. And you know what that is? It's a horrible, horrible look into my brain, because I learned the F Word, but I never really understood it. So anyway, it's Understanding the F Word. I apologize for that. You were very gracious, but also you've got a whole lot going on that website. So why don't we just take a second and inform people as to what they can find there through a lot of the information that you have compiled.
Oh, God, a little bit of everything.
And you're not in front of your computer, are you?
What's that?
You're not in front of your computer, are you?
No. like most people, or like most, researchers, a lot of my time has been occupied for the last, 5.5 years by 911.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty much the seminal event of my adult life, pretty much. Everything flows from that. I mean, everything in our world today is justified on the basis of 911. The wars, the clampdowns on civil rights and privacy rights and due process rights, and on and on and on. Everything is based on the fact that it's a supposed reaction to legitimate responses to 911. But if 911 wasn't what they tell us it was, then all of that needs to be reevaluated, obviously. So it's a very important issue, and it's one that I'm not going to let go of. Some people have said it's been 5 years, we haven't gotten through to anyone yet, it's not going to happen, which is probably true.
Well, maybe not. Okay.
Kennedy assassination is 45 years old now almost, and we still haven't gotten to the truth of that. So. But I, for one, aren't going to give up on it. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a wide range of issues that's explored on my website, in my newsletters. Just kind of whatever catches my interest on the news. I branch out in various directions and follow various trails and see where they'll lead. So you never know what you might find on my website. There's a lot of sordid weirdness on there.
Well, I mean,
all of it documented, though. I mean, I'm
documented weirdness.
I consider myself to be a pretty careful researcher. I don't just grab onto any source that I find because it happens to support an idea that I have. I mean, I try very hard to only present what I think that I can document fairly well. Well,
first and foremost, though, you do have the Center for an Informed American newsletter.
Uh-huh.
Now, is that something that you will disseminate from those who do request it from you?
Yeah, I have a subscription service for it, and they are also posted on my website for those who, some people are very leery of subscription lists, which I can't really blame them in this day and age. You know, everything you do is pretty much tracked and monitored, so yeah, they're available either by subscription or just by dropping by the site and checking up to see if I've posted a new one recently. They don't appear on any kind of weekly or regular basis. They used to, kind of, but they just pop up when I get around to it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about 9/11, in fact, specifically Flight 93, if that's okay with you.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Okay, because that to me is the crown jewel of that whole day, and that's a bad term to use, but anyway, we'll deal with that tomorrow. Going back to the premise about which we're speaking today, and that is serial killing and such, I don't know that you treated this, and I'm going to ask you about it, because this to me seems to be an example of, unfortunately, a number of people being executed to perhaps cover up one particular hit. Did you cover this, or if you did not, do you have any opinion on what in the world that bizarre situation with Malvo and Williams, the DC snipers, were all about?
I did not cover. The book was actually released
before, right? Mm-hmm.
Before that case. I did cover it on my website in a series of, I don't know, probably like 5 or 6 posts. I covered the shootings as they were going on, and then the first trial of John Muhammad. I think I did not. I had moved on to other things by the time the other guy, the kid, went to trial.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there were serious irregularities and questions. That case was just downright bizarre. You know, I mean, you had the police chief going on national television to deliver this bizarrely cryptic message, which sounded very much like a post-hypnotic suggestion, you know, and which was immediately followed by the two of them found sleeping in their car, you know, taken into custody without a fight, and there was just, yeah, there's a lot of weirdness, you know, where the gun came from, and just, I mean, I don't immediately recall all the details, but that's all freely available on my website for anybody that wants to look at that. And that's actually kind of a good introduction to the kind of material that you find in the book. So if you want sort of a free preview, go to my website and pull up that series of, I think, probably about six posts, I believe, maybe more, maybe less, I don't know. And you read through those, and if you find that of interest, you will probably very much like what the book has to offer, I would say.
We're talking, when you were saying about the 6th post, are we talking about the newsletter?
Yeah, the newsletter.
I'm going to hit it right now. All right, it's June 26, 2002. All right. Well, I'm not sure that's it, but that's okay. They know they can go there for it. Well, what I wanted to ask you about it was this. One of the things that was strange was that they came up with the identification of the vehicle that they thought was being used by the two of them, and it's something that's almost laughable, because everything in the beginning was a white step van or a white panel van. I'm going, why in the world would people who are trying to be furtive, a white step van, I mean, this is not the getaway vehicle of choice, or the white van, and of course that stopped traffic on I-95, I don't know how many times when they were looking for them. And then also, when Harry was with the show, we were talking about this as it was happening. When you find out what kind of car they had, when you find out that the back seat was missing, and it was kind of it was a little bit of a dilapidated car.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about this because coming from Jersey, the little nasty secret and the joke in Jersey is you don't have to travel more than like 5 miles on the turnpike or any of the U.S. highways without seeing, two black guys being jacked out of a car, you know what I mean, and the cops going through it. And I'm saying to myself, here these two guys are going around in, like I said, a rather disheveled vehicle with no back seat. How in the world, through all that time and all that driving, didn't they ever get pulled over? Which to me is kind of curious, if you know what I'm saying. And as you just mentioned also, that little, what seemed to be an Manchurian Candidate trigger verse a Cherokee poem or a fairy tale. I mean, and then all of a sudden they get found sleeping, you know.
Something about the duck is caught in the noose or something.
Yeah.
Bizarre. He just reads off this bizarre thing with some kind of strange explanation for it, and then like almost immediately they're taking it. I mean, it was just really, really bizarre. I mean, it was almost like I got the impression that they, whoever was in the controllers or whoever was in charge of this operation had felt that they had lost control of their charges and needed to rein them in or something. So they had this guy go on and read this. I mean, what sounded an awful lot to me like a post-hypnotic suggestion, and to a lot of other people. Well, even people that aren't into the conspiracy, thought that was just really bizarre. That was my impression that they were trying to communicate with these guys through the media, because I believe they had sort of maybe lost control of them or something and needed to rein them in, and which is exactly what happened immediately following that bizarre press conference.
Well, yeah, and I mean, no sooner was that. I mean, we saw that happen on the Today Show, and it was in the early morning hours, and I guess within that day or whatever, they're caught sleeping in, I guess, some kind of like roadside rest area.
In a rest stop, yeah. They were pulled over supposedly at a roadside rest stop, and there was some weird thing about the guy that identified. The whole thing was just really weird. I don't remember all the details, but I mean, it was just bizarre. But it's all in the newsletters. I pulled up my website. The first one I think I actually wrote was in October of 2002 was number 20. That was about the killings, I think.
Right, I see, right.
Then the trial comes up beginning on number 45 through, like number 48 or something like that.
Yeah.
And, I covered all of that weirdness, but it's been quite a few years now, so I don't remember all the details, but there was certainly no shortage of weirdness in that story, yeah. I mean, the whole thing just absolutely reeked. And I believe that one of the victims, if I remember correctly, was involved in some kind of a counterintelligence analyst or something like that. That at the time there was some kind of controversy brewing over. I don't know if that's when all the dust up over the falsified, Iraqi intelligence was in the news. Mm-hmm. But there was something going on, and one of the victims I remember was like a
female.
What's that?
Was she a female?
Yeah, it was a woman. She was some kind of counterintelligence analyst of some sort. Just happened to be one of the victims. Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of the same strands running through that story as through the ones in my book. So it didn't make the book, but it did make the website. So I guess that's better in a way, because anybody can pull them up anytime they want and check it out and see if it's something that you might be interested in pursuing further.
In the research that you did, I don't know how far back you went, but whatever that is, was there a time, and I mean I'm talking about the 19th into the 20th century or whatever, was there a time when it seems that there is now all of a sudden a certain frequency of the serial killer? I mean, were people, dealing with this in the 19th century? I mean, we know about Jack Ripper, okay, and that obviously he was plugged in across the Atlantic, but with what you researched, is there something that indicates that the serial killer, let's just say phenomenon, starts to really become quite obvious? Are we looking at it in the 19th century, the 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century, especially post-World War II? What about that?
The modern serial killer phenomenon, so to speak, and this is covered in the book. You know a lot about the book, actually. More than most people. I guess I should just...
Sometimes the magic works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. It actually began in the late 60s, early 70s in the San Francisco area.
Mm-hmm.
there was just sort of this explosion. We didn't even have in our vocabulary the term serial killer until it was coined by the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit in the early 70s to, explain this sort of explosion of these people. Before that, they were, very few and far between. You had your Albert DeSalvo, you had your Jack the Ripper, but they occurred, Ed Gein in Wisconsin or something like that back in like the 50s or something. But they were few and far between. They weren't like a part of our daily diet, so to speak, until like the late 60s and early 70s, and it really sort of burst forth from San Francisco, which was, probably not coincidentally, in those days, sort of an MK Ultra city, sort of like the whole Haight-Ashbury district, I think, was like an open-air MK Ultra operation.
Well, hold it right there. That's interesting you should say that. I agree with you, and I'm going to bring something up a little bit later with regard to what's going on out there, especially in and around Berkeley and such. Did you find that was a hotbed for a lot of, shall we say, cultural experimentation by the powers that be upon, a segment of the population, which in that time would have been the flower children?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where, some of the original, what was this guy named? Something White, George White or something, operated this sort of safe house where they were, experimenting using prostitutes to drug people and whatnot. And, there was all kinds of MK Ultra type stuff going on in that scene, and that is exactly where this sort of serial killer phenomenon worked. What I found, kind of burst forth, and what I found in my research is, and this is all in the book, is that in this very short span of time, just like a few years, there were something like 6 high-profile serial killers stalking that area in just a period of a few years. You had Charles Manson, who started out up there and then drifted down to L.A. You had the Zodiac Killer. You had this big guy. What the hell was his name? Big giant guy. I can't even remember. But there was like altogether there was like 6 of them. It was just pretty incredible, really. And this was at a time when the serial killer phenomenon was so rare that we didn't even have a name for it yet. And yet out of this tiny little, geographic area, just a speck on the map, you had literally 6 of these guys like operating pretty much simultaneously, which is, it's very, statistically I would think is very highly unlikely. So yeah, I believe that the modern phenomenon really kind of grew directly out of that city and the surrounding area, which was, as you say, just an absolute hotbed of social engineering, so to speak.
Yeah, let me run this by you. One of the things I've been thinking about lately, I guess probably prodded most, and that's a good verb to use when I say about Hunter S. Thompson's death. And then looking back at Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, LSD, Stanford Research Institute, you know where I'm going with this? I'm starting to wonder, I'm beyond just starting to wonder, that this whole movement, this whole free love, drug stuff, was completely supported by whatever you want to call it, government military ops. The Stanford Research Institute has a certain, shall we say, infamy that they share with Tavistock. And I don't know about Kesey, but, Kesey obviously was a grad student at Stanford. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm wondering if this whole thing wasn't just a wonderful, just, I guess, organic thing that happened in society, but whether or not these people wittingly or unwittingly were supported, and this whole cultural shift, and it really was great. I mean, looking at me and my cohort at this point, this section of the baby boomers, really, we don't have a whole lot to brag about as far as more or less crushing morals and other taboos, supposedly, or breaking down the walls that allowed other taboos. So here's where I'm going with this. Have you ever thought about this or done any research into it with looking at that whole orchestrated flower power thing and believing that, yes, in fact, it was orchestrated?
I believe very firmly that it was. Yeah, I believe the whole thing was controlled, and that was kind of a hard thing for me to come to grips with.
Yep.
Because I actually sort of came of age in the 70s, but I always sort of considered myself a decade, that I should have been born a decade sooner, because I'm much more closely identified with the 60s, And when I was in college, my music selections were like the Doors and the Beatles, Jefferson Airplane and all that. I mean, I always felt myself sort of a child of the 60s that came along 10 years too late, and my idols were, Timothy Leary and Ken Kesey and Hoffman and Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, all these kind of guys, and I've come around to a much different line of thought in maybe the last 10 years or so, and it's very difficult for me to not believe that the whole thing was very much controlled, and I believe very strongly that Leary was absolutely an operative, and all of his cohorts, and a lot of people staunchly defend him, but I'm not one of those. And I think that it was very, very, very much a controlled movement, very much. I mean, I look at Woodstock as sort of an open-air MK Ultra project, where all this free LSD was, there's like thousands of hits of LSD, mostly bad LSD, was just circulating openly. And when does that happen? When do people go around giving away thousands of doses of some drug? It's just... that whole scene in retrospect now, many years after the fact and with much research under my belt, I view much, much differently than I did in my younger days. Much differently.
Yeah, we have to be honest, I think, and to realize that we thought it was happening as a result of, like I said, some kind of organic process, or perhaps even a reaction to, which I think is a really trite excuse, realizing that we were living under the nuclear bomb, where one button push could be the end of all of us. This nihilism, so to speak, that leads to kind of like renegade behavior. But something was going on there. But
I think there's lessons to be learned for people today, in that, just as all the kids in the 60s, the hippies and the yippies and the flower children and whatnot, they all thought that they were rebelling against the system, working very much against the system, but to my mind, they were basically being controlled by the system. They were a dissident movement that was very quickly brought under control and kept under control, and I think that's very true today. I think the anarchist movement and the patriot movement, for example, are very much controlled, and same thing. And the people that are in those movements are quite sincere, and they're good people, and they think they're doing the right thing. But I think in many cases they are actually, whether they know it or not, they're working to advance the very agenda that they think they're fighting against.
Well, I'll tell you what, I can't believe you said that, but in a short time to come, I've been heading that way anyway. When you talk about even the Patriot movement being something, of course, we all get it about the Hegelian dialectic, but we never thought for a second that perhaps some of this, or perhaps most of it, is to create and pull us into a Hegelian dialectic that we don't even know we're part of. In fact, what it would be is a conspiracy amongst the conspiracy researchers.
Yeah, well, a lot of researchers, they realize through, their own research and readings that, our intelligence agencies routinely control opposition groups in other countries. They control both sides of the debate, and if you want complete control, that's the only way to do it. You got to control all sides of the debate. You got to limit the parameters of the debate, basically. And they recognize that it's done in other countries. Well, why in the world wouldn't it be done here? It just stands to reason if If they're going to all that trouble everywhere else in the world, why wouldn't they do it here? Of course they would. So it's I think a lot of people are seriously misled, and they may be quite sincere and quite passionate about what they're doing, but in many cases they're working against their own interests and don't realize it.
I tell you what, that if we can for another day, I'd like to talk to you about that without a doubt. But it's the old story that as I watch nationalism start to really sweep across this country, and I'm trying to say to people, don't you understand? This is exactly what happened in pre-World War II Germany, and the whole idea is, and if you'll forgive me, but I mean, if you remember that little segment from Spinal Tap, which when they're trying to explain about, this amp goes to 11. Do you remember that at all, David? Okay. All right, I don't want to sound too crazy, but it's just like, but it's America. And you're like, don't you? No, I know it's America, folks, but don't you understand it can happen here? And it's like, oh, no, this is America. They don't get it.
That's one of the biggest impediments we face is that we are conditioned from birth to believe that this is America, and nothing like that happens
here.
It happens elsewhere in the world, but, certainly not here in America. We're immune to that kind of stuff. But we're certainly not.
No.
By any stretch of the imagination are we immune to that kind of stuff.
And neither is the Patriot movement in any way, shape, or form insulated, protected against, invulnerable to the same kind of handling. But like I said, for another time, and I thank you for bringing that up. But one last thing before we have to go. With regard to what you've done in the book and all that you've seen from your research as you stand back, throughout the decades, and then, like you said, especially in the 60s, was there any kind of pattern that you found with frequency? In other words, did it rise at a certain time, a season, a year, any particular time during a decade? Did you find anything that showed you some kind of plot line through the last 40 years?
No. Well, I didn't really look at it in that regard. Okay. So, no. I mean, all I can say is I didn't find that, but I didn't really look for it. So I don't know if there is a pattern of that sort there. It didn't really cross my mind to look at it in that regard.
I'll tell you this: we have one still going on down here, and again, this is a little bit strange. Are you familiar with the case of Henry Bolin?
No, I'm not, but I do, my book does make note of the fact that the 3 states that contribute far more than their fair share of serial killers are Texas, Florida, and California, which are also just happen to be areas where cult activity is reported far more frequently than in other areas, and also happen to be the 3 primary entry points for most of the illegal drugs entering this country. And if you look through these stories, you'll definitely find that those are common strands that serial killers kind of tend to follow the drug traffic. The other covert operations run sort of hand in hand with serial killers, including drug trafficking and even human trafficking. They kind of follow the same corridors. So your state and my state play very prominent roles in the book.
Yep.
You guys have you've had the Gainesville Ripper.
That's Danny. Yeah.
Henry and his partner, and
Bundy.
Bundy was there for all kinds of people, all kinds of them there, and in my state and in Texas, they just seem to just sprout up everywhere.
I'll only say this about Bolin. I mean, we moved down here, and I think he had just been, I guess, indicted for the murder. But we've been down here like for 14 years, and this thing is the longest running show judicially that I can think of. I mean, I've watched him age, and they still haven't been able to throw him into Old Sparky. And that's another interesting situation. But again, as you well know, Florida, because of the weather especially, there's a lot of transients, a lot of easy pickings for people because obviously they're removed from their home or whatever, from their home state. And it's strange, but I will tell you also in the county in which I live, this county leads the state in unsolved murders. Because what has happened throughout time is that they will kill somebody, whether it's a whack job or not, and they bring them out into good old rural Pasco County. And when the farmer goes out to cut his field or go through his orange grove, guess what he finds? So it's a really grisly situation around here. But before we go, again, Dave McGowan, you've written 3 books. We're talking today about Program to Kill. You do have Understanding the F Word and Derailing Democracy. How can people order them, and how can they also find out more about the work you've done?
For the most part, the books, your best bet is to get them from an online dealer. They're not the kind of books that you're going to walk into a brick-and-mortar bookstore and see prominently on display.
No.
Sure. Especially the second two. The first one a little more so than the second two, because I actually had a real publisher for the first one, whereas the second two I basically had to go the self-publishing route.
Right.
So, the only surefire way of finding them is, through Amazon or, one of the BarnesandNoble.com or one of the online sellers. You can pick up copies from any of those. First one's a little dated at this point. Still some good information in there, but, the world has really changed a lot since I think that book was released in like 99 or something, pre-911. The world is kind of divided into pre and post 911 now. But it's still got some valuable information. But that's really your only sure bet for tracking the books down. And as far as getting additional information, there is you can spend many long days prowling through all the information on my website to get an idea of what I'm all about and what my leanings are and my writing style and whatnot. I tend to inject a lot of humor, a lot of dark humor, black humor, on the principle that, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down and all that. Because I tend to delve into very, very dark topics, so stuff that a lot of people don't really want to even get involved in, and so I try to sort of lighten the load a little bit as much as possible with a little levity here and there. And you can get a good taste of all of that from my website, and if you like what you find, then the books are out there. They may not be the easiest to find, but they are out there.
Okay. If you will, Dave, stay with us. I'm going to bid the audience goodbye. Folks, you will hear Dave tomorrow, and we'll talk about Flight 93. We'll see you back then, and have a good day.